I was working as a sales floor associate at Walmart, and for some reason, one day my manager asked a few employees to help human resources keep an eye out for shoplifters, which I would have normally done anyway, so I casually agreed. I wasn't putting any extra work on my plate, just watching people, but there was this one person that freaked me out. An old lady with frizzy gray hair and thick glasses and a long brown coat with tons of jewelry on. Seemingly rich, but the coat was filthy. I'm guessing if she was rich, she wasn't very clean despite it. Aside from that, she had a pretty big purse, but seemed to be hiding it. I reported her as suspicious to one of the zone managers, and they said they'd contact Human Resources. I let it go at that and continued with my work near the toy aisle, but I caught a glimpse of her again, opposite shelf to me. If you look through the shelves, there are these little holes in them which make it easier to see people on the other side. I got chills from her, hearing her humming a raspy tune. Then I started to smell something kinda like rot. We all know what I thought it was, but I get up and walk to my zone manager and told him she's over at the toy aisle and there's a strange smell coming from her. I think she's stealing meat. I was really determined to get him over there at this point. He asked me and the lady to come with him to Human Resources. This woman still creeps me out, still humming and hiding her purse behind me while we're walking. We got to the office and closed the door, and she was asked to have a seat. My manager sat on the corner of the desk and apologized for bringing her back there. He told her that someone had reported seeing her taking something and requested that she open her bag. The smile left her face and she asked in a raspy, crackling voice, "You want my purse?" He said yes, and if she refused, he can get authorities in there to question her. She stated that she didn't want any trouble with the law, but argued, "If you open my bag, you'll wake Sarah up." I was scared at this point. That meant one of many things, and my manager didn't wait to find out. He asked for all Human Resources personnel to come to the office and asked her once more to open the bag before he called the law. She handed him the bag, and my manager slowly opened it on his desk before looking inside and throwing up all over the place once he did. I was too scared by his reaction to stay in there and left the room immediately, knocking over someone coming in when I did. After I calmed down and came back, another employee told me that the lady was a schizophrenic that had been carrying a dead baby and a cat around in her purse. I thought he was messing with me like a sick bastard, but it was later confirmed by my manager too. She was held in the office until the police arrived and arrested shortly after I returned. I saw her screaming and kicking and trying to get away from them, screaming about Sarah and her bag. I quit shortly after that. I wasn't ready for these kind of people when they hired me. When I was around 7 years old, my parents would always take me to a local grocery store and always ignored my complaints about how boring the trip was. Since there was nothing that caught my eye during these trips, I would always sit in the grocery carts and play with my toys that I brought from home while my parents went to different aisles to gather all the groceries they needed. Obviously, it was not a smart idea to leave your 7-year-old alone in a grocery store cart in the first place, but I was a very obedient child and that part of town had a very peaceful and friendly atmosphere to it. Having my parents out of my sight made me anxious at first, but I slowly grew accustomed to it once I realized that they would always come back to the cart after a few minutes. I just had to wait patiently. One day, my parents left me in the cart and didn't come back for quite a while. Now, this would usually be the time when I would call, or, I guess in my case, loudly proclaim that I'm hungry for my parents to come back. But my parents bought me a Game Boy Advance a few days back, so I was too engrossed in whatever I was playing to even realize how many minutes had passed. While I was waiting for my parents, a woman who I had never seen before seemed to notice that I was left alone for a while and decided to approach the cart. She lightly tapped on my shoulder to get my attention away from my game, which jolted me out of my trance. When I looked up at the woman, her face immediately formed into a huge grin, but I could tell it wasn't genuine. She began to ask random questions and tried to keep a conversation, but I refused to speak. I was a very shy child and always hated talking to adults who were not my parents. The conversation went like this. "What's your name, sweetie? Are you bored sitting in that cart alone? Where are your parents?" I just left her in silence. I never felt like I was in danger while the lady was talking my ear off, because there have been many times when friends of my parents who lived around the area would spot the cart I was in, wait with me, and also try to make small talk with me, which never worked out, until my parents came back, and which would lead to another very long, boring hour in the middle of the grocery store. Anyway, the woman eventually gave up the small talk and began to push the cart and said, "Why don't we look for your parents together?" Again, I didn't say anything since I assumed they were one of the million friends my mother and father had. We were near the market doors until I noticed my father inside an aisle carrying a bunch of items. I called out to him and said something along the lines of, "Dad, your friend wants to see you." When my dad looked up to where I was, his face paled when he saw the situation I was in and just dropped everything he had in his arms and tried to rush over to the cart shouting my name. The woman at this point began freaking out and began to push the cart even faster. We were just outside the store and about halfway into the parking lot when she realized she couldn't outrun my dad if she kept pushing the cart. In a complete panic, she let go of the cart and jumped into a car with a male driver before speeding off. It was obvious she didn't give a shit for my safety. Now, here I was, a 7-year-old in a shopping cart screaming bloody murder as it rolled into the street. I'm guessing there was a dent or something in the road because the cart fell onto its side, which gave me massive scrapes and bruises all on my left body. Seconds later, I heard my dad swearing and quickly picking me up off the road, cradling me into his arms as I continued wailing. Cops were called and my dad gave a statement. Unfortunately, he couldn't get the license plate number of the car because he saw me fall into the street and ran full force towards me, not even realizing the woman escaped with her companion. I had to get a few minor stitches and had a limp for a few days, but other than that, I was okay. Needless to say, my parents never took me to their boring grocery trips ever again. When I was 18, I lived in a young person's homeless hostel. To those of you who have never experienced one, they're based all the way across the UK and are there for 15 to 19-year-olds who've been made unintentionally homeless, seeing as how my mother had moved abroad and my father is useless. A quick brief history of the hostel may be useful here. Whilst I was living there, there were 6 of us in total, me being the oldest, and the youngest was a 15-year-old boy who was still in school. The building was a Victorian townhouse which consisted of 3 floors, 2 bedrooms to each floor, myself at the very top, and a basement, which the garden had been dug out around the house to house the extra kitchen, living room, and small garden area. As the house was solely for young people, the building had CCTV and 8-foot sealed walls around the back garden for extra safety. Now onto the story. One night I was woken at 2 a.m. to a knock at the door, which was common as I lived with 3 other guys at the time who wanted to borrow clothes and other stuff, so I didn't think too much of it. I opened the door to find it was the youngest of the resident, looking clearly shaken. He explained that he was woken by a loud banging coming from the window that overlooked the back garden, so I told him we would both go and look together. As we got to the living room, it was clear that there was someone on the other side of the window. We sheepishly opened the curtains to find a man in his mid to late 20s covered in blood, pushed against the window inside of our sealed garden. I remember the sheer look of relief on his face to see people were home. He kept begging us to talk to him, to let him in, as he was being chased. I shouted through the window that he couldn't come in as it was a young person's hostel and everyone inside was under the age of 18, but he continued to beg. I was very concerned about the amount of blood he had on him and offered to call an ambulance. This is when his face changed to a small smile and he calmly told me, "Oh no, it's okay. This isn't my blood." I woke everyone up and we called the police instead.